Welcome to Talk to Seattle. I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode, I have Logan Bowers, who is running for the Seattle City Council in the 3rd District. I really enjoyed this interview. It was really great talking to Logan. I hope you like it. But before we get to it, I have this quick message. If you're listening to this show, you probably care about local issues. You probably want local content talking about local stuff. And you probably like podcasts. I mean, you are listening to a podcast. Well, have you heard of the Seattle Podcasters Guild? We are a group of local podcasters, and we've actually made a list of every podcast we can find in the area. It is the complete list of Seattle podcasts. Just go to seattlepodcasters.com/list. On that list, we have over 250 different Seattle area podcasts. We have them categorized. So we've got ones about, geek culture. We've got ones about civics and politics. We've got ones from other radio stations. We have just like a ton of local content for you to check out on that list. So once again, go to seattlepodcasters.com/list if you want to see the complete list of Seattle podcasts. Welcome to Talk to Seattle. I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, I have Logan Bowers, who's a candidate for Seattle City Council for the 3rd District. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me, Jason.
So could you tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe your background and experience?
So I'm a lifetime resident of the city. I have an engineering background, and then more recently, my wife and I opened up #Cannabis in Fremont and Redmond. We have a staff of about 30, so we're small business owners here in the city. I have an electrical engineering degree, and I worked in the tech industry for a while, and I feel that gives me a good insight into how projects and things get done inside of large organizations where you have lots of teams and coordination has to be done across a wide range of things. And then the small business experience really gives me insight both in what it's like to be intimately connected to a local neighborhood in the city, and what it's like to be on the other side of the city government, where you have to deal with all the various agencies. And one of the really wonderful opportunities we've had at is the ability to work on and establish a culture that we're happy with for the organization that really encourages folks to think critically, to help their colleagues learn and grow, and work as a team to develop the best solutions to the problems we face. And that aspect of culture building to get good decision making is something I'm really excited to bring to the council.
And so then what made you decide to run for this office?
Yeah, so about a dozen years ago, it started to dawn on me as I read more and more online that housing policy and transportation policy really shape how we all live our lives in the United States, and it's very subtle and somewhat pernicious. And I think a lot of folks don't realize that the neighborhoods in which we all live are not organic in any sense of any stretch of the imagination. They're entirely planned top down from the city. So if you live in an auto-dependent neighborhood, it's because the city's owned everything to require you to own a vehicle. Conversely, if you live in a very walkable neighborhood, it's because the city explicitly zoned it that way. So when we want to make changes as a society to avert climate change and decrease inequality and improve housing affordability and decrease homelessness, those are all city-level decisions, at least in part, in the zoning policies of the city. So it's not super cool sounding area, but it's really, really important to how we all live our lives. So that's been an interest of me to make sure that we get right here.
And so then what made you decide actually to run for office for this? You could be maybe an activist or maybe a blogger.
Well, so I ultimately then chose to run for office because I see Seattle going through a kind of once in a lifetime growth spurt, if you will. And I really want our home to come out of this a world-class city that's welcoming and affordable for everyone. And instead what I'm seeing is that we're on a track for massive inequality and systemic dysfunction in governance. And so I want to get us back on the right track. And a lot of that boils down to our housing and transportation policies that are set at the city level.
Have you had any previous experience in government at all?
So I haven't had experience as an elected official, but I have spent some time in Olympia through the process of having our cannabis shop. The cannabis industry is very heavily regulated. Everything we do is specifically because of the way that the rules are written. Designing the organization and making it functional is all about reading the rules as dictated by the state, and then figuring out how to apply them to make a working business. So my wife and I have been involved in Olympia as those rules change and evolve through legislation, informing legislation, helping legislators craft effective rules and regulations. So that's really opened my eyes to how the legislative process works and how policy gets crafted. So that's given me some insight and opportunities to participate in the process.
And so you're running for the 3rd District. Could you tell me a little bit about that district?
Yeah, so the 3rd District runs from approximately I-5 to Lake Washington, a little tiny slice of Lake Union. And then on the north side is the Montlake Cut, and the south side is right around the north end of the Mount Baker neighborhood, approximately McClellan Street. And then there's a little tiny slice of Beacon Hill. So that's the area of the district. We have about 100,000 folks in the district area, a little bit more. It's home to the densest neighborhood in the entire state, and that's First Hill. It has the historically redlined area in the central district, and it has the center of LGBTQ culture in the city in Capitol Hill. So it's a very kind of culturally rich, diverse set of neighborhoods. It spans the highest incomes to some of the lowest incomes, and all of it is almost all of it is the kind of most walkable, most urban areas of the city.
And what are some of the biggest challenges that this district is facing?
Yeah, I think we're facing a lot of the issues that the rest of the city is facing. Some of them are more acute than others. Displacement is a huge issue in District 3. People who've lived here historically or for many generations are finding that their kids can no longer afford to live in the district. We're seeing issues with traffic. We're seeing issues with an uptick in violence in the district, specifically gun violence. So those are kind of issues that are unique to the district. The housing and affordability issues, I think, are broadly citywide.
And from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges facing the city as a whole?
Yeah, so the overwhelming, I think, biggest issue we need to solve is housing affordability. And the reason I say that is because housing is the largest cost on typically every single family's budget. And what we've seen is housing prices are spiraling out of control for almost everyone in the city. So, it's been phenomenal that we're leading the way on minimum wage in the area, but we're in a situation where housing costs are rising faster even than the increasing minimum wage, and so folks are in many ways worse off than they were before we started rising wages because it's all been eaten up by rent. So we have to get that under control if we want to be an equitable city. And related to that, we also have to have a sufficient supply of affordable housing, because if we hope to solve our homelessness issue, it doesn't solve homelessness on its own, but it's a necessary first step. The reason I say that is the root of the problem is that we have more people that want to live here than we have homes for them. And whenever we're in that situation, somebody's going to get squeezed out, either to the suburbs or onto the streets. So we have to make sure we always have enough homes for the number of people that want to live here.
So what can the city do to help homeless folks in this town?
Yeah, so the city the county as a whole has approximately 12,600 homeless neighbors right now, according to the last census. And we have approximately 6,000 shelter beds. So at its most basic root, we are short 6,500 shelter beds. So, with that kind of deficit, we're going to have a lot of tents on the street. There's nowhere for these people to go. So we need need to right-size our investment in our homeless services. I think what we've seen is that the county and the city both have been chronically underinvesting in homelessness services as the population has grown in the area. For West Coast City, we don't have an especially high rate of homelessness. It's approximately the same as every other West Coast city, with the exception of San Francisco, which is doing considerably worse than everyone else. So we just need to have the right amount of shelter capacity. It needs to be enhanced shelters with services that can help folks with their with either mental health issues or addiction issues, or need some family or life counseling. So there has to be the right kind of services in addition to just being a bed. But we're clearly far below where we need to be at. That's kind of the short-term acute issue. The longer-term issue is we need to bring down housing prices so that as we help folks lift themselves out of homelessness, they have a home to go into and they don't squeeze someone else back out on the other side. And so that issue boils down to city zoning code effectively bans construction of anything except $1 million plus mansions and luxury apartment buildings in about 95% of the city. So the way that works is around 70 to 75% of the city is zoned single family only. So that's a 5,000, 7,200, or 9,600 square foot lot. It may only have a single home on it. And whenever an existing house in the city gets torn down and replaced, you're going to get, in that zoning area, you are going to get a boxy, ultra-modern $1 million plus mansion because that's the economical thing you can do with that lot. Similarly, in about 25% of the city, we've zoned for larger apartment buildings. This is all the 50 to kind of 70 foot or so mid-rise and taller. And at that point, your first 1 to 2 floors of the building are concrete and rebar. You have to excavate for a parking garage. And once you've done those things, the cost per unit is just going to be high in the building because those are expensive construction techniques. So those sized apartment buildings under current technology will always be somewhat expensive. So if we want housing that is affordable to people with middle income or lower, we have to use low-cost construction techniques, and that means duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, stacked flats, smaller buildings that have 2 to 6 units in them. And at that size, you can use wood frame construction. You generally don't have to do any large excavation, and so the cost per unit is lower because the construction costs are lower. So fundamentally, what we have to do as a city, if we want housing to be affordable, is we have to legalize it. It's currently illegal. And so we have to take that 75% of the city and allow these kind of modest housing types. So the big thing for me, I describe it as ending the housing prohibition. And the reason I say that is because these kinds of housing, duplexes and triplexes and so on, were legal before decades ago, before they were outlawed and before the city council has been incrementally tightening the rules. So we have examples of these structures in all of our neighborhoods. They're generally cherished. They generally look great. And it's almost like bizarre that we have these historic buildings that we love, but yet we outlaw construction of anything even remotely like it. It's just weird.
And do you think the city has enough money right now to take care of the homeless folks? Or do you think maybe there should be a revenue increase?
So looking at other cities, we spend... other cities that do pretty well on housing their homeless populations tend to spend more per capita than we do. So my expectation is that we probably will need money overall. I think there's plenty of room in the budget to spend money more efficiently and more effectively. And the city auditor just came out with a report that details at least some of that, how we can make the system more efficient. I think that will get us some of the way there. I don't think it will get us all the way there.
And what can the city do to help improve transportation in the area?
Yeah, so transportation, I really like to talk about transportation in context of global warming, because that's honestly the biggest driver of what we need to change when it comes to transportation. So carbon emissions from transportation are approximately half of the total emissions for the city. And it's not economically realistic that we will be able to turn that to zero simply through switching to electric vehicles. So what we have to do is we have to substitute existing trips with either bus, bicycle, pedestrian, or even no trip at all. And I think that suggests a few things. So one, if we're going to have a goal of reducing auto usage and dependence in the city, we have to look at how we've configured our neighborhoods and whether or not that's even a realistic goal. So one of the things I often go back to is there are thousands of homes in this city where it is not realistic to walk to a grocery store. So I always, I look at this and I think, like, how are we ever going to convince our citizens that they should give up their vehicle for at least some of their trips if they cannot get food without it? So, and it's really weird. We've outlawed grocery stores from these neighborhoods. It's not natural that there's no food outlet within walking distance of these homes. It's entirely because the city has made it illegal to build more grocery stores. I was telling someone this actually, and they live in Ballard, and they thought about it, and they're like, oh, it's really strange that we have 4 new grocery stores and they're all within like 3 blocks of each other. There's a TJ's and a New Seasons and a PCC and a Ballard Market, and they're all right squished in the same place. If those were spread out throughout the Ballard area, it would make it immensely easier for people to get food without using their vehicle. But the zoning code is what it is. So we need to fix that. And what I want to see is ultimately get the city so that every home in the city has a walk score of 100. And that takes us to a place where I think everyone can imagine their lives without a vehicle, and they'll choose to do so in many cases. We don't have to use the stick; we can use the carrot. And it's counterproductive to use the stick if we don't even legalize the things that people need to get by. So that's a big change I want to make. Obviously, upzoning in near transit is critical to that, so that most of the growth ends up in an area where folks do not need to have a vehicle. Related to that and transit specific, we do need to right size our investments in modes other than automotive. So I'd like to work on better bicycle infrastructure and better pedestrian infrastructure. I think the city's done a disservice on that front with the way that they've been currently investing in cycling infrastructure, because we have a lot of bike paths to nowhere, and or they're built out for one block, but then not the next block, and then the next block is built out again. And so my experience and the experience of other cyclists has been phenomenally unsafe to be constantly weaving in and out of traffic. And then I think you get the legitimate criticism, which is, well, no one uses these bike lanes. And it's like, well, yeah, they're not actually useful. So we need to be looking at, when we do invest in bicycle infrastructure, it needs to connect 2 destinations point to point and be useful and safe along the whole route. And so I think that's a methodology change in how we decide to make these changes.
And you talked a little bit already about improving affordability, but do you have any other ideas how to improve the affordability in this city? Right now, it's just so expensive for folks.
Yeah, so it will come from a mix of plans. So the work that the city has done on MHA is a good start, and that will provide affordable housing in high density areas. Rising the most kind of effective thing we can do overall is simply increase the total supply of homes, so that folks are not as competitive with each other and bidding up the prices. Working with our regional partners to have a similar kind of urbanist philosophy in our neighboring cities, it will help regionally with that issue as well, and kind of take the pressure off of Seattle specifically, or any specific neighborhood. I think what I'd emphasize here is, if we make a change that applies everywhere but is diffuse, no particular neighborhood will be under intense pressure to see all of the growth or all of the development. What we're seeing right now, where we're only making concentrated zoning changes in these tiny pockets of urban villages, is that it creates a rush of really intense development in one location. It displaces a lot of people at that location. Whereas if we kind of spread it out across the whole region, no particular area will see any intense development or intense displacement, and that will help on kind of both those fronts.
So we live in very politically polarized times. As a leader, how would you work to bring people together in the city?
Yeah, so I think District 3 has been lacking in this area for quite some time. I think I'm fairly passionate about making sure that we have enough housing for everyone. But I think it's important that folks have a say in how we implement that. And so, through the channels of outreach and through the channels of feedback and stakeholder meetings, and I plan to be regularly available in the district, both with an office and floating throughout the district with coffee hours and so on, so that folks can contribute ideas and requests and preferences. I think that's very important, and I think having that dialogue continuously will lead to the best outcomes. And I think just because we're adding homes to a neighborhood, I think folks should have a say in what that looks like, what kind of aesthetic do they want their neighborhood to have, and we should do that work up front so that we can codify it. And rather than trying to stop every project on the back end, have conversations up front about what we want things to look like so everyone can be on the same page as we move forward.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to connect with you, how should they do that?
Yeah, so my election website is votelogan.org. So we'll be rolling out more details on the platform as we go. And I always want to hear from folks. So there's a contact and feedback form. Please do send me any information or your thoughts or your preferences. Also, you can follow me on Facebook, Logan for Seattle. On Twitter, my handle is Logan B. And on Instagram, Logan for Seattle.
And we'll have all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.